What if I told you the richest empire on earth doesn't sell tech, oil, or luxury goods? It sells forgiveness, and it's been doing it for centuries, tax-free, consequence-free, and with a smile. Welcome to the Vatican, a city smaller than a Walmart parking lot, yet powerful enough to rival trillion-dollar corporations. They say it's about faith, they say it's about salvation, but behind the incense and stained glass lies one of the most calculated business machines the world has ever seen. We're talking secret banks, offshore accounts, Nazi gold, mafia money, and a global real estate empire built off fear, guilt, and Sunday morning donations. And the wildest part? They still claim they're broke. This isn't just about religion, it's about power. It's about how the smallest country on earth became one of the richest organizations in history, and how they've kept it hidden in plain sight. Because when your business is eternal life, there's no limit to what you can charge. When most people think of the Vatican, they picture stained glass, solemn prayers, and a little puff of white smoke announcing a new pope. What they don't picture, a billion-dollar empire hiding behind the altar. Because while the Vatican may be the world's smallest country, just 0.27 square kilometers, it controls a global web of wealth that rivals multinational corporations. And here's the kicker, it all runs on donations. Your grandma's Sunday tithe, that spare change you dropped in the collection plate, all of it feeds into a system that's more Goldman Sachs than gospel. Let's break this down. The Catholic Church has 1.3 billion members worldwide. That's not a religion, that's a demographic powerhouse. It owns tens of thousands of properties, art so priceless, it can't even be insured, and investments in industries that have nothing to do with faith and everything to do with profit. But they'll never show you the books. In fact, the Vatican has spent centuries perfecting the art of secrecy, shuffling funds across borders, hiding behind religious exemptions, and using charitable fronts to keep the public in the dark. And when things get tight, they claim poverty. In 2021, the Vatican announced it was running a deficit and needed more donations, while simultaneously sitting on assets worth billions, just in Australia alone. The truth is, the Vatican has mastered the dual identity: holiness in public, high finance in private. And while they preach humility from the pulpit, behind closed doors, they're managing real estate portfolios, offshore accounts, and interest-bearing assets like any well-oiled financial institution. Because for the Vatican, religion isn't just faith, it's business, and business is good. Now, let's talk numbers. Because if there's one thing the Vatican understands better than scripture, it's compound interest. Take Australia, for example. The Catholic Church is worth at least $30 billion down under. Not bad for a country with about 5.5 million Catholics. That's roughly $5,454 per believer, and they say religion doesn't pay. Now take that number and apply it to the Catholic population of Europe, the US, Canada, and Australia. About 372 million people in total. Do the math, and you land somewhere north of $2 trillion in global wealth. That's trillion with a T. That's we could buy Amazon, still have change, and build a gold-plated Vatican 2.0 money. And before anyone starts shouting, but they're a church, not a business. Let's be real. If Apple had a product people willingly gave money to for zero physical return every Sunday forever, they'd call it the iChurch, and Tim Cook would be in robes by next week. Here's the kicker. If the Vatican just took that $2 trillion and parked it in a boring investment, earning a modest 3% annual return, way below stock market averages, they'd make $60 billion every year. That's enough to fund 5 SpaceX launches, buy every Super Bowl ad slot, and still have billions left to invest in. Oh, I don't know, more gold thrones. But what did they report publicly? In 2018, they claimed they made a whopping $20 million. That's cute. That's Etsy store money. That's oops, I dropped this under my papal couch cushion money. So either the Vatican is the most financially incompetent organization on earth, or, and hear me out, they're not showing us the full picture. Because when you run a multi-trillion-dollar operation based on eternal salvation, the one thing you don't want your followers asking is, where's all that money going? Now, you might be wondering, if the Vatican really is sitting on trillions, where do they keep it? Under the Pope's mattress? In a secret Swiss vault guarded by choir boys with laser eyes? Not quite. They've got something even better. Their own bank. And trust me, it makes Wall Street look like amateur hour. If most people knew what the Vatican Bank actually is, they'd stop thinking of the church as holy and start thinking of it as the world's most exclusive offshore financial institution. Officially, it's called the Institute for the Works of Religion, or IOR. But let's be honest, that sounds more like a secret villain organization than a spiritual ministry. And in many ways, it kind of is. See, this isn't your local church bake sale. The Vatican Bank is one branch. One building inside the Vatican, no ATMS, no online app, no forgot my password button. Just one bank in one country with one shareholder, the Pope. It was founded during World War II and not by coincidence. Back then, the Vatican was getting deep into trouble. Too many eyes on their finances, too many public records in European banks, too many questions. So they did what any clever empire would do. They built their own bank, one that answers to no one. No government oversight, no annual disclosures, no press releases about profits, just vibes and vaults. And that's how the Vatican became the ultimate financial black hole. Money goes in, no one knows where it comes from, no one knows where it ends up. In the 1940s, the bank started accepting deposits from all over Europe. We're not talking about nice, clean savings accounts here. We're talking about literal suitcases full of cash being carried across the street by wealthy Italians, fascist donors, and later, reportedly, the actual Nazis. But yes, Hitler's regime allegedly used a Swiss middleman to move money into the Vatican Bank, and because it operated as a sovereign entity, no allied nation could touch it. It wasn't on any blacklist. It had diplomatic immunity and unlimited divine discretion, and as the decades rolled on, the Vatican Bank became more than just a spiritual vault. It became the go-to laundry machine for shady fortunes. Organized crime, check. Drug money, check. Life insurance payouts from Holocaust victims that were never delivered to families, big disgusting check. And when people started asking questions, the church did what it does best, play dumb. Oh, we didn't know our tenant was selling weapons to the Nazis. Oh, we didn't know where that money came from. Oh, we're shocked, truly shocked. All the way to the bank. Even the CIA's predecessor, the OSL, caught wind of the money moving in and out of the Vatican. But could they do anything about it? Nope. Because the Vatican Bank operates in a legal no man's land. It doesn't report to Italy. It doesn't answer to the EU. It answers to one man in white robes with a golden ring. And let's not forget, they don't just store money, they invest it in real estate, in corporations, in stocks and portfolios so broad they make Wall Street hedge funds look lazy. The Vatican Bank became the church's lifeline, especially when donations took a dive. They stopped relying solely on the collection plate and started operating like a sovereign wealth fund with rosary beads. It's not an exaggeration to say that the Vatican functions more like a multinational holding company than a religion, except this one never pays taxes, never releases earnings, and has moral immunity in the court of public opinion. So the next time they pass the basket on Sunday, just remember, God's bankers are doing just fine. Long before the Vatican had investment portfolios and offshore accounts, it had something far more profitable, fear, and they knew exactly how to monetize it. Enter the indulgence, the church's spiritual version of a get-out-of-hell card, sold for cold, hard cash. Here's how it worked. Commit a sin, pay the church, and boom, God forgives you quicker than you can say Ave Maria. Small sin, a few coins. Bigger sin, gonna cost you. Murder, that's gonna take a mortgage. But hey, salvation isn't free, sweetie. This little operation kicked off around the 6th century, and let's be clear, it wasn't pitched as a scam. It was framed as mercy in a for sale, and people bought it, millions of them, because when the alternative is burning for eternity in a lake of fire, slipping the Pope a few gold pieces sounded like a pretty good deal. Indulgences became the church's first major cash cow. No overhead, no inventory, no customer service complaints, just an unlimited supply of guilt and an even bigger appetite for gold. And the best part, this hustle lasted for over 1,000 years. That's longer than most civilizations, longer than most currencies, and they still had the audacity to call it charity. Now sure, there were a few bad apples, corrupt bishops, abusing the system, selling indulgences like hotcakes to fund their wine cellars. But did the Vatican stop it? Please? That money was flowing in faster than confessions on Sunday morning. Eventually, people started asking questions, like Martin Luther, who was so shook by the indulgence racket, he nailed his complaints to a door and accidentally launched the Protestant Reformation. But did the church refund anyone, apologize, say, oops, we maybe shouldn't have sold forgiveness like raffle tickets? Absolutely not, because in the Vatican's eyes, business was booming, and God's will just so happened to align with their balance sheets. Now you'd think after cashing in for 1,000 years, the Vatican would be financially bulletproof, but nah, they've had more financial meltdowns than Wall Street in a housing crisis. In the 1800s, the papal states were bleeding cash. The church had land, but not liquidity. They couldn't pay their bills. They were broke, like calling the Rothschilds for a loan, broke, and that's exactly what they did. Yes, the same Catholic Church that preached against greed and usury literally went to one of Europe's most powerful Jewish banking families to beg for money. The irony wasn't just thick, It was eternal, but did pride stop the Pope from signing that check? Please, pride doesn't keep the wine flowing. Fast forward to the early 1900s, the Vatican still struggling to stay afloat. Then came the World Wars, and suddenly a new opportunity arose. Instead of sitting on the sidelines like they did in World War One, the church got cozy, real cozy, with fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. Let's break that down. The Vatican rented property to an arms dealer selling weapons to Germany. When Catholics in Nazi Germany got paid, up to 10% of their wages were auto-deducted and sent straight to the Vatican. Yes, the Third Reich was doing tithes by direct deposit on the church's behalf. It gets worse. When Jews were deported and murdered in camps, life insurance payouts were blocked. Why? Because insurance companies demanded death certificates from people who were incinerated. No certificate, no payout. And guess where that money went? You guessed it, right into the Vatican bank. By the time the world caught on, the Vatican had already built the perfect escape hatch. Their own bank, a sovereign, untouchable vault immune to scrutiny, audits, or justice. And it wasn't just Nazis. Mafia money? Oh, they were in there too. Drug money, racketeering funds, shady investments from God knows where, all welcome, as long as the cash was clean when it entered the church's books. The Vatican Bank became the most sacred laundromat in Europe, and the Pope, he was no longer just a spiritual leader, he was CEO of the original shadow economy. So when people talk about the Vatican's moral high ground, just remember, you don't build a $1 trillion empire selling candles and rosaries. Once upon a time, the Pope didn't just bless your baby, he owned your land. Back in the day, the Vatican controlled over 15,000 square miles of territory across Italy. The church didn't just run sermons, it ran cities, armies, agriculture, and collected taxes like your local kingpin. But that came to a screeching halt in 1870 when the Italian government basically said, thanks for the spiritual vibes, now hand over the land. So what did the Vatican do? Well, like any empire that loses real estate, they pivoted to a classic hustle, real estate flipping. The Pope and his crew started investing in Roman properties like they were building an Airbnb empire. And guess what? It worked for a while. Even the aristocrats who stayed loyal to the Vatican, known as the Black Nobility, jumped in and copied the Pope's portfolio. They all made bank. But then came the crash of 1887 and poof, Vatican investments tanked harder than crypto in a bear market. So the church did what it does best, rebrand the grift. They launched a shiny new campaign called Peter's Pence, donations, framed as a righteous way to support the mission. Translation, we're broke again, pass the collection plate. With the money rolling in once more, the Vatican quietly started investing in businesses, industries, and even weapons manufacturers. Yes, the church, which preaches peace, had financial ties to arms dealers. But here's where it gets extra juicy. There's long been speculation that some of these investments weren't just about return on equity. They were about control, ownership in industries, political influence in Italy and beyond, and untraceable black budget cash funneled through shell companies and shadow partners. Need a property in London? They have that. A palace in Paris? Probably. Do they actually need it? Of course not. But in the global game of quiet power, the Vatican doesn't just want to be invited. It wants to own the table, the chairs, and the silence. And the cherry on top. Most of this money came from donations made by everyday people. People who believed they were giving to God, not funding the world's holiest stock portfolio. Now let's fast forward to the 20th and 21st centuries, when the Vatican's problems weren't about poverty or property. They were about predators, and they came wearing collars. We're talking about the Catholic Church's priest abuse scandals, the global tsunami of horror stories that blew the holy doors off the institution. By 2002, the church had already paid out over $175 million in hush money settlements. And by 2014, that number skyrocketed past $3 billion. That's not a typo, that's $3 billion, enough to buy a small nation or fund a decade of private jets and silk robes. And what was the Vatican's response? Not confession, not justice, just cover-ups. They shuffled priests around like chess pieces, assigned them to new parishes, moved files, buried evidence, and whispered one phrase again and again, we're handling it internally. Translation, we're making it disappear. But here's where it turns from scandal to conspiracy. There are long-standing theories that the church intentionally used settlements and gag orders to keep victims quiet, not for justice, but to protect their asset pipeline, because when your entire empire runs on moral authority and mass donations, you can't afford a PR implosion. So instead of justice, the church invested in silence, and it worked for decades. Even as the stories got louder, even as reporters dug deeper, even as popes expressed sorrow with all the sincerity of a corporate press release, the money kept flowing, and when the heat got too high, the church made its boldest PR move in decades. Pope Francis, the people's pope, humble, relatable, smiling for selfies, talking about climate change, and kissing babies like a rock star. But conspiracy theorists argue that this was no accident. It was strategy, a carefully calculated global image reboot. Because nothing resets a scandal like a charming new CEO who seems like he might actually care. And it worked. Donations bounced back. Media coverage softened, and many Catholics around the world felt renewed hope. But behind the incense and the headlines, the Vatican never opened its books. The bank remained secret, the investment stayed hidden, and the priests who abused, many never even saw a courtroom. So ask yourself, if this is what we know, what else is still buried behind those gilded gates? Just when you thought the Vatican had exhausted every trick in the divine PR playbook, enter stage left, Pope Leo XIV, or as the headlines love to remind us, the first American Pope in history. Yep, straight out of Chicago, with a past in missionary work and a rumored love for baseball. Honestly, it sounds like the church went full rebrand and hired a pope who could double as a Disney Plus origin story. But here's the thing, Pope Leo XIV isn't just a figurehead, he's a message. He's the Vatican saying, we hear you, we've changed, we're relatable now. Look, he's even from the Midwest. Behind the robes and rosaries is a masterclass in damage control. Because let's not forget, the church is still reeling from abuse scandals, shady bank dealings, and the kind of financial secrecy that would make the Cayman Islands blush. So Pope Leo XIV steps in with that carefully curated mix of humble servant and progressive reformer. He talks about climate change, about social justice, about being inclusive to LGBTQ+ people, but not too inclusive. Let's not upset the old guard, right? He's modern, but safely so, and people are buying it, literally. Since his election, donations have seen an uptick, media coverage has softened, and the Vatican has quietly resumed business as usual. Still tax-free, still secretive, still running its trillion-dollar empire behind a curtain of holy smoke. Now here's where it gets real juicy. There are whispers, and not just from internet weirdos, that Pope Leo XIV's election wasn't just about spiritual renewal, it was about protecting assets, rebuilding global trust to keep the empire's economic engine humming. Because when you're sitting on ancient art, prime real estate, and a black box bank with no regulatory oversight, the last thing you want is a PR scandal tanking your public image. Enter the friendly Pope trademark. And look, maybe he really does want to change things. Maybe his heart's in the right place. But here's the kicker. He doesn't control the money. That's still handled by Vatican insiders, bureaucrats, and financial advisors who've been playing this game longer than most countries have existed. So while Pope Leo XIV blesses the crowds and preaches humility, the church's financial empire keeps stacking, protected by centuries of political immunity, legal loopholes, and a deeply loyal global network. It's like trying to reboot a centuries-old corporation with better customer service, but all the same execs are still in the boardroom. So the next time you see Pope Leo XIV waving from a balcony with doves in the background, just remember, behind every good pope is a trillion-dollar brand doing just fine. After all the scandals, cover-ups, secret banks, and billion-dollar land grabs, you'd think the Vatican might take a break, maybe humble themselves, open the books, give us a peek behind the curtain, but nope, they're still telling the same old story. We're broke. They say they're running a deficit. They say they're operating on reserves. They say they need your help to keep the lights on in the largest private art collection on earth. That's right, the same institution that owns entire city blocks in Manhattan, priceless Michelangelo originals, and possibly $2 trillion in global assets, is passing the basket like they're behind on rent. And people keep giving, because the Vatican doesn't just sell hope, it sells heaven, and there's no refund policy on salvation. Let's be clear, this isn't about attacking faith. Belief is beautiful, but the business behind it, that's the story they don't want you to question. Because if people start asking, why is God's house richer than every tech company on earth? Things get uncomfortable. If the Vatican is this wealthy, why are so many Catholic schools, churches, and charities underfunded? Why are they still begging for donations from working class families while they sit on portfolios that could fund universal healthcare in several countries? The answer, control, silence, and one of the most successful branding campaigns in human history. They built a system that can't be audited, a bank that can't be traced, and a narrative so sacred you're not even supposed to question it. But we just did, and we're not alone, because the Vatican doesn't operate like a church anymore. It operates like a global corporation wrapped in divinity, and for over 2,000 years, they've perfected the art of profiting from faith fear, and forgiveness. So next time you see that gold-trimmed balcony in Vatican City, just remember, behind the holiness, behind the hymns, and behind the robes is a business, a trillion-dollar empire dressed in white. And that is how you turn salvation into stock options. If this blew your mind or just made you side-eye the donation basket a little harder, hit that like button so more people see what's really going on. Subscribe if you're into uncovering the truth behind power, money, and the polished lies they hope you never question. And drop a comment below. What do you think? Is the Vatican a church, a business, or something else entirely? We've got more stories coming, more empires, more secrets, more truth. Because this is just the tip of the gold-plated iceberg.